Hello E-rates. This video tutorial is an opportunity to look at how we would go about designing this small boat from this unit of work here. Obviously we're going to be doing this in SketchUp, so if you haven't already done so, create a new SketchUp document and also come to the small boat unit of work and make sure that you have opened the E8 boat measurements. Now you're going to need this file regularly, so you might want to open this in a second window. I've actually done that here because we're going to need to refer back to this for measurements on a number of occasions. So let's begin by jumping back into SketchUp. Now, as we should know by now, when we start anything new in SketchUp, the first thing we want to do is check our measurements. So we come to the I for information, the length of units, make sure that we are set to millimeters and at least 0.0 for our precision so that we can be as accurate as possible. If you don't have these set, then everything you're about to do will probably be wasted time because you'll have to delete it and start again. Once you've done that, of course, you can close it out, and I usually get rid of the person by default. You don't have to, but they just kind of get in the way in the end. Okay, now that we've got our SketchUp environment ready, let's jump back and look at the diagram. So as I've talked about in class, I look at this diagram and in fact anything that I'm going to design, and I start by looking at what are the basic or the primitive shapes, so the simplest shapes that I might see here. Now, when I look at this boat, what I'm seeing is that we basically have a rectangular prism, so a three-dimensional rectangle as the base. It just had the fronts cut off and some curving on the back, but essentially it's a rectangle. We have another rectangle here for this cabin area, and we also really have essentially another rectangle here for this back cabin as well, and finally a cylinder for the funnel. So if we look at these, we've really got three rectangles and a cylinder that make up the basic shape of this boat. We also notice, and this is pretty obvious for us because this is the joint that we're learning at the moment, we have a housing joint here. So this cabin piece is inset into the bottom piece using a housing joint. So it's going to be important that we measure that and draw that correctly. We can also see lots of measurements, and we do have to be careful when you read this, but we can see, for example, the tip of what would have been the front of this rectangle right through to the back of the rectangle is going to be 150 millimeters. We can also see from this measurement that it's 40 millimeters across, and we can see from this measurement that it's 19 millimeters thick. And this should come as no surprise because this is roughly the wood that we've been using in class for our practice joints, and we're going to be using something similar in class to build this. We can also see similar things with, for example, this cabin piece. We can see that it's 19 millimeters. We can see from this part here that it's 50 millimeters tall, including the amount that goes in the housing joint. And we can also assume, because it's the same size across, that it is 40 millimeters. We can see things like how far back the tip of the front cut goes because it shows 40 millimeters here. We can see, for example, how big this was when it was a rectangle because it's got a 50 millimeter measurement here and a 30 millimeter there, and also a 30 millimeter across. So all the measurements that we need are provided. So let's start by building the first part. While there may not be a strictly correct way or only way to do this, for me, I'm going to start by modeling the base, then this cabin part at the front, the back cabin, and then finally I'm going to model the chimney or the funnel. So if I jump back into SketchUp now, I'm going to start by just drawing the base rectangle for my base. And again, sorry, jump back for a second. We know it's going to be 150 millimeters long, 40 millimeters wide, and 19 millimeters in thickness. So just like we've done for our practice joints, I'm going to start with my rectangle. I'm going to draw something that roughly looks the right shape, let go, and type some measurements in. So it's 150 by 40 wide, and I'll zoom in nice and close now so I can see my actual piece. And now I will take that up to be 19, typing that number in so that it goes to the correct measurement. So here I have what is essentially the base of the boat. And if I rotate it in this sort of angle, just get a little bit better, we can see that that is roughly the same as this base part here. So before I go any further, I'm going to turn this into a component by selecting everything that makes up that piece, right click and make component, and I'll call this the base. And it's important to make things into components, as we know, so that we can move them around and rotate, etc., without breaking them. And it also helps us if we want to hide a piece temporarily or bring it back so that we can work on other pieces more efficiently. So with this piece in mind, I'm actually not going to do any shaping yet. I'm going to leave all that for the moment. I'm just going to start by looking at the next major piece. So if I have a look here, I have another piece that we said was going to be 50 millimeters tall, 19 millimeters wide, and also 40 millimeters across. So I'm going to start by drawing, actually, in fact, no, I'm not. I'm going to do the joint because I think that's a little bit more complicated. So this housing joint is very much like a rebate joint that we've done previously, but because it's not on the end of a piece of wood, it's somewhere in the middle part of it. We now call it a housing joint, but the basic idea is the same. We're going to create a gap that is as wide as the piece going in, so in this case 19, and it's also going to go halfway down. So what was 19 here means that this part must be going down 9.5. So what I'm going to do is draw that in, but I don't know where to draw it exactly. But I actually do if I look at my measurements, because the front of the joint here, we have a measurement for. So from the front of the piece through to where the front of the joint is, we know is going to be 60 millimeters. We also then know that the whole width of the gap, the whole width of the joint, is going to be 19 to match the material going into it. So we've got the measurements that we actually need. So if we go back now, double click on our component, so we're editing it, and what I'm going to do is use my ruler, or my tape measure, sorry, and I'm going to create a construction line by dragging it down, letting go, and typing in that 60 millimeters, because this now becomes the front of my joint. And I'm going to draw that in with my pencil tool using the two positions that it locks onto, and I've now got a solid line. From that line, I'm again going to take my tape measure, and I'm going to go another 19 millimeters, the width of the joint. And just like before, I'm going to take my pencil and I'm going to draw in the part of that dotted line that I actually want to keep. With that being done, I can rub out my construction lines, and if I take my push-pull tool, you can see that because I've drawn solid lines across, these are three separate pieces now. Because it's a separate piece here, I can pull it down to create the joint itself, the part that's going to get cut out, and I know that that needs to be 9.5 because it's half of the 19 millimeter thickness. So type it in, press enter, and there I have my joint. So again, if I look at my design, I've now created this joint here. It's been filled at the moment by the other piece, which we're about to do. So we may as well finish off the rest of this piece first. So again, if we look at our design, we can see that the tip of the bow, the front of the boat, would be centered across, and where it comes back to on the edge is 40 millimeters. So the way I'm going to do that is again using my tape measure. From this front piece, I'm going to go back, typing in 40 millimeters, and this gives me a point here that I can draw in from the middle back to here again, just using my pencil. Now we didn't have to measure the middle because SketchUp loves to tell us where the midpoint is on a line. So midpoint of course means middle. So I can simply lock onto that point, lock onto where the construction line meets this edge, and draw a piece in. And I can do the same across to the other side. And then with my push-pull tool, simply push those out. Now I might need to rotate around to see the other side, so I can push that out as well. There we go. And finally, I'll rub out my construction line. So now I have the bow of the boat, the front, and I have the place for my housing joint. the last thing I need to do is the corner pieces, the rounding here. Now, we haven't been given explicit values for how round, if you like, these are, what the curvature is, but I'm going to demonstrate how I went about it. So again, I'm going to use some more construction lines because I want them to be even on both sides. So what I might do is take my tape measure again. I might start by moving a certain amount down, and I'm just going to go with, I don't know, 10 millimeters to start with. I think that looks about right. And then, so that I get an equal curve, I'm also going to go 10 millimeters in from each side, there and there. And now that has given me points that I can create a curve. Now to do the curve, I'm going to use a new tool that you may not have used yet, and it's called the 2-point arc. You may not see it on your toolbar. You might have to go to the 3 dots to see all your tools, up towards the top, and choose a 2-point arc. So using that tool, the way it works is you click on one point, and then you click on a second point, and then you'll see the curve is being drawn. You can put it to where you want, which I'm happy with that point there, and you click again to finish it. So I've got a nice equal curve that comes around there. And because I used measurements, I can do the same on this side. Click there, and I'll get that nice equal curve on there. That didn't go right, sorry, I'm just going to undo that. There, and there, good. So I've got a nice equal curve. And just like before, use my push-pull tool to take those out. Let's rotate around to see the other side and push that one down as well. And just like before, we'll finally remove all of our construction lines to clean that up. So zooming out, I now have the fully finished bottom or base of my boat. Although the eagle eyes of you, some of you might have noticed that in the actual design, there's also a little cut off here. Now, as I've talked about in the class, I'm not going to demonstrate how to do that. It's a bit of a challenge for you. I will say it's not quite as easy as just drawing a line across here and cutting it off, because we've got a different shape here. But have a go at it, see if you can work out how to do it. If you can't, that's understandable, but it's a good little challenge to see if you can solve that. Clicking outside of this, of course, closes the component, and we now have our finished piece. Let's now move across to actually now create this part here. So there's a few ways we can do it. Of course, we could simply draw this piece separately and then move it into the gap. So I could come in here, I could go and draw it off over the side here and then drag it over and position it where I want to go. But I'm going to demonstrate another way to get started that might be a little bit simpler. And the reason for that is we've already got literally a gap here that is the right size for the piece. So essentially, if I just took this rectangle here and pulled it up using my push-pull tool, I would have that piece. But of course, this is all part of a component. I don't just want to pull that up. And I'll just demonstrate for argument's sake. If I was to just pull that up, I lose the actual joint, and I don't want to do that. So I don't want to just modify this piece. I do want another one. But of course, this is a component, which means so long as I'm not editing the component, so I haven't double-clicked and got the dotted lines, it means I can draw on top of it. And I don't even have to measure, because I can simply use my rectangular tool. I can click to this corner here, for example, and then also click to this corner here. And what I've done is drawn a separate rectangle on top. And you can see this because if I was to, for example, take my base and move it away, you can see there is the rectangle I just drew. But when it's drawn together, it looks like it's all one piece because it's just sitting directly on top. But of course, I can now take that rectangle and pull that up by any amount, and you can see I haven't lost my cutout because that's part of this component, not part of the new piece I'm drawing. So just like before, I'm going to pull that up, and I know the total height was supposed to be 50, so I'm typing in and pressing Enter, and I've now got another piece of the boat made, but I don't have the curvature. Before I do that, I would like to make a component. I can just select it like this. Now, it works because to select something into a component, you have to select all of it, and because the bottom is already a whole component, unless I literally chose everything on the screen, this will still only select that part. It's not going to choose any of the bottom unless I literally did that. So we can just select this part and we'll make a new component and call this cab. Okay, now just like before when we did the back, I'm going to rotate to a better view. I'm going to make sure I'm editing this cab, and I'm also just going to curve these corners. Now I could do it the same way, measure a certain amount in, but in this case, just for speed, I'm going to freehand it ever so slightly. Not the best way to do it because of course these are probably not exactly the same curves. In fact, I can see they're not, but for right now, I'm just going to go with it. Mainly to speed this up just a little bit, but I would strongly recommend you do some measuring to get them a little bit more equal. But there we go, we have another piece. So going back to our design, third last piece is this cabin on the back. It's going to start with a 50mm long, 30mm tall and 30mm wide piece. So again, there are multiple ways we could go about that. We could again model it separately and bring it into place. We can draw straight on top of here. We could measure out different things. There's lots of different ways to do it. In this case, I am going to do it separately. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to draw another rectangle that we know is going to be 50mm long, 30mm wide. So let's type those in, 50, 30. And we also know it's going to be 30mm tall. So we're just doing yet another rectangle piece. I'm going to turn that into a component, and because I've done it on the side here, it's easy to select all by itself. And I'm going to make that a component, and I'm going to call that back cabin. There's probably better names for these, and if you know one, you can certainly use it. Now, what I want to do is move this piece across. So again, I'm going to grab it, and I'm going to move it into place. But where exactly do we put it? How do we know how to position this so it actually sits properly? Well, again, there are multiple ways we could go about this. Let's look at our diagram. We can probably realize that if this is 30mm across and the whole boat's 40, we can see there's a little bit of a gap between the edge of the boat here and this back cabin. And it's reasonably safe to presume by the look of it that this is centered. So again, we can either measure some things in, that's fine, we can do that. But we can also just take advantage of what we talked about before, and that is that SketchUp likes to tell us where the midpoint is. So here we can see the midpoint of that line across there. And we can also see the midpoint of this cube, also rectangle that we just drew. So with our moving tool, if we're very careful, we can grab that midpoint and drag it and lock it to the other midpoint. But to do that, we're going to need to rotate into the right angle. And this is where having a mouse really helps, because I can keep them moving and rotate at the same time. So I can see that, and you'll notice that the cube that we're dragging has gone transparent at the moment. Sorry about that. Just get that menu to go away. Try that again, sorry. Rotate. Grab not that piece, try and grab the right piece here for you. So let's select it first, grab the piece, and as I was saying, as we bring it in front of another piece, it's gone transparent for us so that we can see the parts behind. So we can see that when we find the midpoint, there it is, we've locked together like the pieces like to do, and we can let it go. And there we have that piece right in the center. Now again, you could have measured it, and I might do that quickly as well. So another way I could have done that, for example, might be to take my tape measure tool before. Now if this piece is 30 and the whole thing's 40 and I want it to be centered, that must mean there's a total of 10mm left, but that's split between both sides. So that means from there inwards would only be 5mm. So there is a point there, and in a similar way, I could take that corner now and lock it to that intersection point. That might be an easier way, but I wanted to demonstrate how when you move pieces, sometimes they go transparent so you can see things behind them. Whichever way works for you, of course, is perfectly fine. Let's rub out that construction line. All right, we are very close to being finished here. If we again look at our design, we have the bottom with our housing joint cut out. We have our front cabin with curving, and we have our back piece in place, but we don't have this curve. So again, just like we've done a few times now, I'm going to first of all double click on that component, so I'm editing it. I'm going to draw a curve in again, just with my 2-point, and again I'm just doing a freehand curve at the moment. You might want to measure it for more accuracy, but I want to just speed this up slightly and get that curve in. So just like in the picture, we have a bit of a curve. All right, we are absolutely almost there. The last real piece we have is the chimney, the funnel. Now, to do that, I'm going to want to find, in this case, the middle of this section. And again, I can do that in a few ways, but I'm going to use my trusty tape measure. So instead of drawing lines like we've been doing this way, I'm simply going to join 2 points, and that's going to be corner to corner and get a dotted line in that way. And we're doing just like we're doing a piece of paper. If you want to find the middle of a piece of paper, you draw from the 2 sets of corners, and where it crosses over, of course, is the middle. And the reason I want a middle is that when I draw a circle in SketchUp, if you haven't done this before, the default way of drawing a circle is to draw from the center and then expand out as your circle. So again, if you don't already have the circle in your toolbar like I do, go to your 3 dots, come up the top, and you'll find the circle. So when I bring my circle tool in, you can see that is where it's locking at the center of the circle. When I click and hold, it's dragging out, and I'm dragging with the radius. So if I want my total circle to be 6 millimeters across, or 8 or 12, and I say those numbers because they are the standard sizes of round dowel, so that's the round wood that we have, 6, 8 and 12 millimeters. So if I want it to be a total of 6, 8 or 12, then I have to halve that for my measurement. So I'm going to go with an 8, which means the value that I'm going to actually type in for its radius there is going to be 4. So type that in the bottom, press enter, and it's resized to the correct piece. Correct size. And again, like everything else, I can take this and I can pull it up simply to whatever height I want. I'm just going to go with something that looks proportional for my design. So if I look down the bottom, that's about 27. I might just make that 25. I think that's not a bad little height there. As always, we're going to rub out those construction lines, being careful not to rub out any of the actual boat. And now if I look at it, there is my version of the boat for the moment, and there is the original design. And obviously, apart from all the measurements floating around this one, I think they look quite similar. So hopefully you've been able to get to this point. As always, you should pause, rewind, and rewatch parts of this video until you can get each piece. But again, I want to go right back to the very first things I talked about, which is to look at an object as its base shapes, start by drawing those, and then adjusting by adding and subtracting from those pieces, either cutting things off or adding things on to change the overall look, to give it detail. Make sure you use components regularly, so every new sort of piece, make it a component. That way you can move things around. If you don't like where it is, it's much easier to move it or even delete it completely if it's already a component. So that's pretty much the process. The last thing I say is if you want to make some more modifications to this, you're more than welcome. I don't really think you can change it dramatically in size, but for example, if you wanted to, I don't know, not have this piece completely that size, maybe you want to make it shorter. So maybe you want to cut some of that off first and have it be shorter. Maybe you want the whole boat to be just a little bit shorter, so you want to cut it off a bit earlier before you do these curves. Maybe you don't like the curves. Maybe you want to have straight lines across. There are a few things that you can do to change the design of this boat. But if you are going to make changes, I'd like you to think about how you might physically do them as well. So for example, you don't want to stick something onto this. So I don't want to just draw a random shape hanging off the back of it because I need to think about how that would work. I don't want to, for example, try and hollow out the inside necessarily, because how would I actually do that? I haven't learned that sort of skill yet. It doesn't mean these things are not possible. It just means for now, maybe don't go to that extreme. If you've got an idea that you think could work, but you're not sure, I'm more than happy for you to get in contact and ask me, and I'll give you my opinion on whether I think it's a good change for the moment, or maybe something we just hold off for the second. Depending on how you go with actually physically building this, there are some other things we can do and will talk about. But for now, I guess let's focus on getting the core design done so that you will, in fact, be ready to start building. So again, hopefully you are able to follow along. I know this video is a little bit longer than normal, but we have just gone through a full, quite complex piece in the end. So thank you for watching. Thank you for getting this task done. Make sure you saved it onto your OneDrive, and then also have a downloaded SKP ready to submit to Schoolbox when requested.